Hello and welcome to Conscious TV. I'm Iain McNay and today our guest is Nigel Lesmoir-Gordon. Hi Nigel.
Hi, Ian.
And Nigel's quite a fascinating man. He's a filmmaker, also been involved with two books. And we're going to talk about chaos theory and fractals and his spiritual journey because he's really had quite some experiences along the way. And one of the things he loves doing in life is bringing difficult subjects into the world by making films about them. So let me just first of all show you some of the things he's done. He co-wrote a book here, Fractals, a graphic guide. We're going to find out what fractals are later, don't worry about that. And a book called The Colours of Infinity. And also he's been the director of 3 films that are on this DVD here. Colours of Infinity again, Clouds Are Not Spheres, and Is God a Number? So we've got lots to talk about today, Nigel. But let's start with your youth. I know when you were a teenager, I think 13 years old, you were writing poetry and performing jazz and trying to find more deeply for yourself the meaning of life.
Yes, I was. I wasn't actually performing with jazz when I was 13 or 14. I went to public school when I was 13 and was preparing for my confirmation. And in the course of that preparation, I got very enthusiastic about the Christian path. And in point of fact, at that stage, wanted to go into the church. This desire to go into the church didn't last very long because Elvis Presley burst upon the scene. And I suddenly discovered a new God. Heartbreak Hotel. Well, I just couldn't believe my ears. I really don't know what I was listening to. All Shook Up, Hound Dog, extraordinary, amazing music, just out of nowhere it seemed. So at Oundle School, I got very interested in modern music and jazz. And in fact, I had Humphrey Lyttelton. I booked him into the school and he came down there and performed.
So you were a promoter?
I was a promoter,
yeah.
Yes. I started the CND movement at Oundle.
Right.
And at that stage, I did start to write poetry because I suddenly was obsessed by these big questions. Who am I?
Yes.
Where did I come from? And why am I here?
Yeah.
In fact, why is there a universe? These questions suddenly became of enormous importance to me. So poetry became a way for me to express my thoughts, my indefinable yearning for knowledge and explanation. And then when I left Oundle, I continued to write poetry and started to perform with jazz, again in an exploratory fashion. And then at about the time I went to film school, because I decided that I wanted to be an artist in some shape or form, and I'd written a play and I'd already started to write a novel and got the feeling that these are not really going to be terribly easy paths, but that as a filmmaker, as a trainee film technician, I could actually make a weekly wage.
Okay.
So I opted for film school. And at that time, 1965, LSD 25 came on the scene.
Let me just stop you there. So when you first had these questions when you were a bit younger, did you get any clues at all? Okay, you mentioned the church briefly, but were you actually finding any way forward in going deeper with these questions and the answers?
Yes, I suppose I did. I mean, I got very influenced by reading Tolstoy, by reading Beckett, by reading Henry Miller. These people were seeking for understanding, and they helped and guided me. And I just felt that there was more to life than met the eye.
So things weren't quite adding up and something felt missing, is that right?
Well, we were brought up as children of the Second World War in a very straitjacketed society in a society that was trying to put itself back together again after such death and destruction. The straight society. And actually what happened, I think, really was Jack Kerouac came into my life.
Right.
And On the Road.
Yes.
And this road journey, this quest that he was on. And then I discovered Ginsberg, Howe,
Allen Ginsberg, yeah.
Ferlinghetti, Corso, the American beat poets,
Yes.
who were definitely seekers. And I kind of fell in. In fact, Ginsberg came to stay at my flat in London for a couple of days. And when they were doing the Holy Communion poetry gathering at the Albert Hall,
Right.
and all those guys had already experiences of the psychedelic drugs, perhaps in the form of mescaline and peyote, which was growing naturally in the States. And then, as I said, lysergic acid through Timothy Leary, tune in, turn on and drop out, came into London.
So you first experimented with LSD. It was legal in those days.
It was legal.
And what actually happened the first time you took it?
Well, the first time I took it, because I wasn't able to let go, because I wasn't able to surrender to it and cease to hang on to whatever it was that was Nigel, what we call the ego, this sense of individual I-ness, I had a very bad experience. But I saw the lights and the patterns and the wonderment of it all. But I went into that LSD hell, really.
And can you describe that? What happened?
Well, instead of seeing the beauty of the infinite nature of consciousness, I saw rather deep, dark shapes and forms of lizards and dragons, and frightful people look really frightening, quite
Yes.
Demonic.
Yes.
But I knew there was something there, and I met a guy called Mike Duffett, who had been taking mescaline in the desert, and he offered to guide me the second time I took it. And that was a divine experience, because he enabled me to let go. He said, really, Nigel, it's all you. There's one being, call it God, call it love, call it consciousness, but there's one thing, let go and fall into it. And he took me and stood me in front of a mirror. What I saw was unrecognizable. I didn't know what it was. But I was able to let go, and I experienced this infinity. I experienced what George Andrews called, I had this sensation that George said, I am the wind that blows through me. In other words, the draft from the window falls on you and you become that draft. I could and did stare into a jar of marmalade for an hour. Just in total, there was the entire universe there. I became the marmalade. And the wonderful thing was getting a piece of tissue paper and unfolding that and seeing the birth and death of universes within this piece of paper. So I knew that what I had come across was, if not the truth, another and higher state of consciousness.
So reality, as you've known it up to that point, just completely changed, didn't it?
Absolutely.
You started to see things in a completely new way, and presumably Nigel, as you knew yourself, wasn't actually seeing these things. There was something else that was open and aware. Is this right?
Yes, Nigel wasn't seeing.
Yeah.
Well, Nigel wasn't the seer, but rather there was a seeing going on.
Yeah.
There was no focal point. It was that sense of infinity, that sense of eternity, and that almost, I suppose, it was like a sort of what they may call an astral consciousness, because apart from the beautiful lights and patterns that one was experiencing, I can only say one felt universal love.
Yes.
And thinking what the Beatles came up with the song, All You Need Is Love.
Yeah.
And that went to number one. Love is all you need. And that was the essence of the flower power generation. That was the essence of where we were going. Sadly, the music died, if you like, in 69.
So after this experience when you saw things so completely different, how was it afterwards when the effects of the drug wore off? Did that stay with you for a time?
Yeah, sure. Well, obviously the experience, that sense of infinite consciousness, that fades, but it leaves you with a very strong impression. My goodness me, there is more to this than I've ever been told about. Where I found it expressed, Iain, was in the teachings of Eastern mystics.
Yes.
In a sense, it's hidden in the Bible for sure. Love thy neighbour as thyself. Perhaps not as profound as some of the Eastern teachings, but then I started to read the teachings of the Upanishads, the Rig Veda, which texts were describing higher states. And several of us found ourselves turning towards the East for support, for further insight.
So you went to India?
A couple of my friends came across a book called Yoga and the Bible from Cambridge Library, got it out and read that, and it was a book by a guy called Joseph Leeming, in which he described a form of yoga called Surat Shabad Yoga, which was the yoga of the sound current. Now that felt, the yoga of the sound current. And then I've reflected back on the Bible, where it said, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And maybe this word that they're talking about is this sound. It seemed to fit together. So these friends of mine went to study in India with an Indian mystic called Hazur Maharaj Charan Singh, and came back absolutely transformed and had learnt and been instructed in this Surat Shabad Yoga, how to practice this yoga.
So how did you feel they were transformed?
Their questions had been answered. They no longer felt, well, let's get high, let's smoke some pot or let's take some LSD. They said, well, look, we have this within ourselves.
So they'd found it by natural means without having to take drugs.
If they had certainly started on the path
Yes, okay.
to self-realization.
Yes.
Was it Socrates said, know thyself, I think, and that's what the master was saying, is know yourself and you will know whatever it is, this greater being that projected himself into the physical observable universe. Get back to him, get back to the source. In fact, what the teaching said was follow the sound to the source. Sit still, still the mind, and then listen to the sound inside your head.
So when you were with the teacher, what kind of methods did he use? What kind of instruction did he give you?
Well, he instructed us really in very, very simply how to sit still, how to repeat the mantra in your head, how to shut your eyes, shut your ears, sit still.
So it's a silent mantra.
Repeat the mantra silently.
Yeah.
I mean, I know what it is, and I'm not encouraged to say it out loud because I know you're not asking me to, but we never say it out loud because it's endowed with power.
Yes.
And if you keep it to yourself, well, we all get the same mantra, so we all know what the other guys and girls are doing, but we don't say it out loud. Sit and concentrate on the mantra for a certain amount of time, and then take up another posture where you listen, particularly on the right side.
And you're listening to whatever sounds you hear.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think if they put you in a soundproof chamber, you can hear two noises. One is the sound of your nervous system, a high-pitched sound, and the sound of your blood in circulation is a low-pitched sound. And although we're not listening particularly to those sounds, we listen for this, what is, if I haven't already said it, the audible life stream. So he said, if you can catch the audible life stream, it will take you back to the source, to the place we all come from. And I mean, he said, you're not your body, you're not your mind, you are the soul. Now, these are just words I know, but what in the yoga you try and do is, A, to sit still and become out of the physical, and then to still the mind, to stop thinking.
And was this easy for you to start with? Or?
No.
So the mind was doing its usual chatter.
It just goes on, and it still is not easy. It is not easy to stop the mind going on.
And you've been doing this same meditation now for
40 years?
Wow. You do it every day?
Yes.
Wow.
I do. I believe it, although I'm saying it is not easy.
But presumably it had enough effect on you to start with to encourage you to stay with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I would probably say that the master, the guru, was an inspiration. In fact, I would say I wanted to be like him. And if I could just say this, he has never asked me for a penny. Nothing. He's never asked me for anything. And I can go and stay with him, well, actually with his predecessor now, and they don't ask for money.
Okay.
It's a give. It's all give.
No, I understand. So you came back to England.
Yeah.
And then you built, from what you were telling me earlier, quite a successful career. You were making what today are called promotional videos. They're called pop promos.
Yeah.
And you worked with Pink Floyd and 10cc and Donovan and some other well-known names. So you were making a good living out of your work.
Yes.
But this kind of wanting to discover yourself at a deeper level and understand life was still running at the same time, I presume.
Yeah. What I think I felt was, well, one way to... what I really wanted to share was my sense of awe and wonder.
Yes.
My awe when I think, holy smoke, we're in the universe. What's going on? Look up at the stars or look down and see all this and be amazed. And I was amazed. I was filled with wonder and I was filled with awe. And for a while I saw the way to communicate this and to share it was in science, was to make films about scientific discovery. Well, I will jump in immediately and say that science is not sufficient to describe the mystery of consciousness. It doesn't do that. So that remains the domain of the mystics. But science is enthralling, science is inspiring, and scientists to me are the leading edge of the search for knowledge. And I wanted to be a part of that, and I wanted to make films with those people.
Yes. And so you heard about chaos theory and fractals.
Yeah.
And you started to look into them. So when you first heard about chaos theory, what was your first response?
Well, it seemed to have a grasp of actually a way of describing the world, that very small causes can have very big effects. They say a butterfly flaps its wings in Arizona and it rains in London. That it's this whole holosphere is all joined up, and we're all in there like the dance of Shiva. We're all dancing to the same tune. It wasn't. I mean, I didn't get so deeply enthralled with chaos theory, but chaos theory took me to reading books on mathematics, And in particular, two books. One was The Emperor's New Mind by Roger Penrose, and the other was Does God Play Dice by Ian Stewart. And in both those books, I came across this entity called the Mandelbrot set. Now, the Mandelbrot set is the sort of epitome of a fractal. It's a black blob.
Well,
Crinkly.
let's go back.
Okay,
so
go
what's
back.
a fractal?
A fractal, well, fractal geometry, the subject, is a way of describing the real world. That is the world of wrinkly, crinkly.
Are you looking at
I look at this.
plant here?
I look at this.
It's real in one way, I guess.
It's not a Euclidean shape. Now, Euclidean geometry is the geometry of the regular solids, spheres, squares,
So
triangles.
Euclidean would be like this would be.
That would be a Euclidean shape.
Yes.
Yeah, but it's not a shape that you encounter in nature. You don't. Nature
rarely
doesn't.
see.
Well, nature
Yeah.
rarely makes really rigid square or,
Yes.
or rectangular or cubic things.
Yes.
Nature makes things
Well,
like
you're
this
looking
cauliflower.
Looking at our prop we brought in,
Yeah.
the cauliflower.
The cauliflower, this particular cauliflower, is a very good example of a fractal. Now, a fractal is a fractal shape is an object that has self-similarity on many scales. Now, we could think like trees, the big trunk of the tree, then into the branches, then into the twigs, then into the leaves. And in all those different sizes, you see patterns repeated over and over and over. Circulatory system in the human body is a very good example, from the big veins and arteries down to the very finest capillaries, but they're all repeating the same shape over and over and over. So we live in a wrinkly, crinkly world.
So just show us.
Okay.
Show me something.
I'll
earlier
show you
with-
what I mean here with the cauliflower. The beautiful, beautiful, irregular shape of the cauliflower is repeatable on several scales. If I tear off this here, it is very like the whole cauliflower. And if I take one smaller bit of it, that is like this piece. So it's been repeated here at least 1, 2, 3 scales. And I could, if I had a very fine razor blade, I could cut off another smaller piece, and that would also be a repetition of this same scale, scaling down of the same shape. Now, fractal geometry is called the geometry of roughness. It's a way of describing the irregular shapes in nature.
As opposed to Euclidean geometry, which is smoothness.
Which is
and
smoothness,
edges,
which are
yeah.
regular things. Now, there's one of the films you just picked up, one of the films on that DVD is called Clouds Are Not Spheres.
Yes.
So Euclidean geometry cannot describe the shape of a cloud. But Benoit Mandelbrot, who devised the fractal geometry, created, he came across it and developed it, I think you could say. He developed fractal geometry as a way of describing the real world. And he found a way of describing in mathematics, this is another thing we've come on to about the wonder of mathematics, how fractal geometry can describe as a formula a cloud.
Okay. So what do you mean by that? Describe as a formula.
You can write down a formula for the coastline of Britain. You can.
So
I can't actually tell you what that equation
it must
is.
be a very long form.
It's not particularly. You see, let us just come back to the Mandelbrot set, because this is what I came across in both these books. Roger Penrose's book, The Emperor's New Mind, chapter on the Mandelbrot set is called The Land of Torblet Nam. And in Ian Stewart's book, it's called The Gingerbread Man. Now, on March the 1st, 1980, at IBM, Mandelbrot found a formula, was experimenting with things called Julia sets, which had been worked on in the 20s by Gaston Julia and Pierre Fatou. two mathematicians who had intuitively felt that there were these extraordinary shapes hidden inside mathematics, but they couldn't reveal them until the era of modern computers. And it wasn't until Mandelbrot was able to use a very sophisticated computer at IBM and feed in this very simple formula that gives us the infinitely complex Mandelbrot set, which is Z goes to Z squared plus C. Now, that is a very simple equation. Z goes to Z squared plus C. That's not long, very short, like E equals mc squared, like Einstein's equation, when where matter and energy are equivalent. And the power of E equals mc squared is awesome. I mean, it gave us atomic power. But Mandelbrot's equation, it's actually very much like Newton's law of gravity. It's also a very simple equation. Well, he'd been running this formula, playing around with these Julia sets, and this strange, crinkly, wrinkly black blob appeared on the computer screen. And they all go, whoa, what's that? And they found that if they zoomed the computer in onto the edge of this crinkly, wrinkly shape, looks a bit like a cat or a cactus, that they found more and more detail. And they kept zooming in, and they found more and more detail. More and more remarkable patterns, beautiful mosaic patterns, very reminiscent of Islamic art, very reminiscent of the Paisley pattern. These, I mean, extraordinary, delightful, very pleasing patterns. And then, after a while, they started to apply colour to the different levels of computation. And the colour revealed even more splendid wonder hidden in this boundary, the edge of the Mandelbrot set. The black blob is all, when you run this equation and you give it different, Z goes to Z squared plus C, when you give it different values, either the numbers go down to zero or they burst into infinity. And on the way to infinity, they create these extraordinary patterns.
Infinity really means infinity.
It really means infinity. I mean, Arthur C. Clarke in my film, The Colours of Infinity, says you can zoom into this. This is bigger than the entire universe. And I have got images in my film where they've zoomed into the Mandelbrot set to a distance equivalent to travelling to the Andromeda galaxy. Huge distance, and still inside the boundary of the set, inside these amazing colours, are hidden little replicas of the original set, the original black blob.
So what is the law involved that this keeps reoccurring?
Well, it's called iteration, because when I said Z equals Z squared plus C, the actual equal sign in the case of the Mandelbrot set is a double arrow.
Yes.
So the numbers keep going back on themselves. The formula keeps repeating. It's called an iterative process.
So the repetition that's why you say it's all in mathematics.
Yeah.
Because there's a repetition in the formula.
Yes, the formula feeds back on itself, round and round and round and round. But you needed a really big computer to run these numbers this long. And you need powerful computers if you're going to do live zooms into the boundary. The computer has to keep crunching these numbers.
Okay, I'm going to really throw a question at you now, and this may not be a fair question.
Probably not. Thank you.
How does this help us understand consciousness?
Yeah, well, I would say that the Mandelbrot set to me was like a gateway to visualizing the infinite and eternal nature of consciousness.
Okay.
You see, the patterns that I saw in Ian Stewart's book, Does God Play Dice, when he's exploring the Mandelbrot set,
Yes.
these look like the patterns I saw on LSD. There seems to be some connection between the Mandelbrot set and the way the mind works. There's some, in fact, Arthur C. Clarke says there's some connection between the Mandelbrot set and the way nature operates.
So that raises the question for me, which comes up every now and again in interviews: what comes first? Is it matter, or is it the mind seeing the matter? Does the matter exist without the mind seeing the matter?
Well, according to quantum physics, it doesn't.
That's right.
Because in the quantum world, there's a waveform. You go in and you look and you collapse the waveform and you get particles. Until you look, there's nothing there. And I do, in the other film I made, is God A Number, Roger Penrose asked, what comes first, maths, the mind, or the physical universe? Now, as I understand it, the mind is a projection of a higher order of consciousness, and that higher order of consciousness writes this world we live in the language of mathematics, and the physical comes out of the mind. You know, if a tree falls in the forest and there's no one there to hear it, does it make a noise? I don't think so. I don't think it makes a noise, because you have to have that brain, that ear, that mind to hear it fall.
Well, I don't know. I have to think about that.
You know, I mean, all the Eastern mystics tell us this, that the physical is an illusion. You know, here we had this apparently solid cauliflower and this solid table and glass.
But it's an illusion on the level that everything is just energy, and quantum physics, the little bit I know about it, mainly through the interviews on Conscious TV, certainly pretty much it's agreed by most leading edge physicists that matter is just energy vibrating, and it's vibrating at different speeds, and the different speeds decides on what kind of, whether it's glass or wood or whatever. But what does that actually tell us about the material world, insofar as we also live in a material world where this is solid?
Yeah.
And surely there's different laws apply in the world of materiality. It's almost like there's different levels of laws, as there's different levels of consciousness.
Yes. Well, obviously, in this physical world, if I walked into the table, I would hurt my leg. There's no physical leg would be hurt by the physical table. But consciousness, to me, resides on a different vibrational plane. And I think that the brain is the physical organ in which consciousness accesses the physical world, but it's almost like a radio receiver, the brain, because the brain itself, I don't think is the mind. I think the mind is a vibration higher, and I think you might ask this question: well, where are my memories when I'm not remembering them?
That's a great question.
Where are these thoughts? Tomorrow when I'm not here, I will close my eyes and I will visualize you. And then I will turn and I'll do something else, and that vision of you will fade somewhere, go off somewhere. Come back to LSD, and the sense I had then when I was really, really tuned was that my consciousness was eternal, was infinite, and that...
Did you exist at all?
No, Nigel
didn't exist.
Didn't exist. Just really didn't exist.
Yeah.
I felt like the entire universe. I felt absolutely infinite, and I felt eternal. I know that's true. I just know it's true. And, you know, they may say, well, lysergic acid 25. Actually, that's another 24 forms of lysergic acid. Why lysergic acid 25 should have this power, I don't know. But you might say, well, you know, it was the effect of the drug. But you take such a minute quantity of it, micrograms, you know, it's not. It does open the doors of perception. Aldous Huxley, the doors of perception.
In your film is got a number. I'm going to read a quote I wrote down here that you said, or someone said, it may not be you, but mathematics provides clues about how the brain receives, stores, and processes information. Now, what do you mean by that?
Mathematics is a way of describing the physical brain. I mean, fractal geometry.
So the physical brain is
a fractal. The physical brain is a
It looks a bit like the cauliflower.
It does. I
thing,
mean, it's all these sort of folding in on itself.
Yeah.
It is a fractal, and if you look at the neuron pathways, they're definitely a fractal structure. So I guess if you physically could kind of like zoom in on the brain, you would see this going in and in and in and in on the physical level. But I mean, I think it was the great Leibniz said, God is a mathematician. Now, that I don't think, you know, I mean, the mind can use mathematics to describe the physical observable universe on all scales now. But I don't think I could possibly claim that mathematics would take us into understanding consciousness, because even though the great gods of physics, Hawking, Dorking, the likes of these fellows say, you know, there is no higher power, it's all explainable in physics, cannot explain the mystery of consciousness. And perhaps in the most profound thing is what we have is this mystery of self-consciousness. And you see, as I sit here and look at you, Iain, I'm thinking to myself, well, this is the universe looking at itself. And I can feel that the whole purpose of this thing, if I may use the word purpose, is a re-knowing of the thing in itself by itself. That consciousness
is playing and experiencing itself.
Yes,
basically.
it is experiencing itself. It is finding itself in this awesome universe that it has made. This is the journey that we're on. I mean, I think we are physical beings having a spiritual experience. I mean, I think we are spiritual beings having a physical experience.
Yes.
We're not physical beings seeking a spiritual experience. We are spiritual beings. And what is so striking to me is this element of self-consciousness, which the cauliflower hasn't got it, the water I'm sure hasn't got it, this chair. And I don't think animals have it, just being able to reflect upon their own existence.
Just following on our thread earlier when we were talking about the mind, and you were saying, where are thoughts when you don't think them? And I followed that up, well, where are thoughts when you do think them? Because it seems that some of the research that's been done recently, they can't actually find an area of the brain which is capable of storing thoughts, which leads us to the conclusion, well, I think you mentioned this, that maybe our brains are a receptor to somehow, it's interesting actually the parallel to the music, because I'm in the music business, but how I earn my living, and you know, it's now the big thing now is to talk about the cloud.
Yeah.
The music is in the cloud, you know, it used to be on good old vinyl, and it was on CD, and then of course forget about cassettes and things, leave that out, but from the CD we moved to downloads, it was download. The music was downloaded to your iPod or on a device, and now you access. The big thing seems to be the future. they talk about cloud, the music being in the cloud, it's stored somewhere and you access when you want it. And it's almost as like you can draw a parallel with the information in our mind. Where is it? It's in the cloud. It's in the field.
Yeah.
It's out there.
Yeah.
And when we want it, or sometimes when we don't want it, that information is available to us.
Yes. I mean, as I see it, there is, as they describe it in the Eastern mystics, there is this entity called the universal mind. It's a mind it's a state over and permeating the physical, but it is made of mind stuff, and it's not made of physical stuff. I just want to flip back a moment to the Mandelbrot set, if I could, because when I said Z goes to Z squared plus C, under the C there's a little I, the letter I, which is a complex number. And the complex number is the square root of -1. Now here is mathematics what's going to take you into the mind, because in the physical world you don't get minus things. You have a table, we don't have a minus table. And so you say, well, the minus things are a bit imaginary. And then you say, well, I'm going to throw in the square root of -1. And this is what is added to the formula of the Mandelbrot set. And I've got a couple of quotes here, which I really do want to get right. So if you don't mind, I'll just dip into them. Complex numbers have two components or coordinates, real and imaginary. The imaginary component contains the factor I, which I just mentioned, which stands for the square root of -1. It is this I which has opened up the world of fractal geometry. Since the square root of a negative number cannot be placed anywhere on the number line, mathematics up to the 19th century could not ascribe any sense of reality to those quantities. The great Leibniz, again, inventor of the differential calculus, attributed a mystical quality to the square root of -1, seeing it as a manifestation of the divine spirit. It's a mathematician talking about the divine spirit. He called it that amphibian between being and not being. And a century later, the great Leonhard Euler wrote in his work Algebra, in words that still echo the same sense of wonder, all expressions such as the square root of -1 are impossible or imaginary numbers, since they represent roots of negative quantities. Of such numbers we may truly assert that they are neither nothing, nor greater than nothing, nor less than nothing. Now that is what gives you the infinite Mandelbrot set. That square root of -1, an imaginary number that can only exist on the mind plane, can't find it out there in the physical world, creates an entity of infinite complexity, but also of extraordinary beauty. So I had to come back to that square root of -1 because that was the clue to that discovery. And it was reading about this Mandelbrot set that inspired me to make the first film I made about the wonder of mathematics and consciousness, which is this film, The Colours of Infinity.
Yes.
Now, I'll tell you straight away, I didn't come up with that wonderful title, Colours of Infinity. That was created by Arthur C. Clarke.
Yes, who appears in the film.
Who presents the film.
Yeah.
Now, Arthur wrote a pamphlet called The Colours of Infinity about the Mandelbrot set, and he gave a lecture in Riyadh to 50 cosmonauts. And he stood up in front of these cosmonauts and astronauts and said, you think you've been in space and see something big? Now, boys, I'm going to show you something really big. And he took them on this exploration of the Mandelbrot set. And Arthur says this is one of the 7 wonders of the world. And it was enough to spur me to go to Sri Lanka and get Arthur for 2 days and to do his basic links, set the whole thing going. And then what happened was I made a pilot out of Arthur's pieces that I recorded to camera and some Mandelbrot set zooms, which I got from Princeton, on a 1-inch tape. It was in those days a huge 1-inch tape. And I put together a pilot and took that to my old friend David Gilmour, Pink Floyd, and said, I want to show you this pilot, David, because, oh man, I need some money to finish the film.
Yeah.
And he watched the pilot and it totally blew him away. And he said, no, I don't want to invest in it, but I'll do the music. And then, having Arthur on tape and the promise of music from David, I was able to raise, actually, well, we're talking 1995, it cost 80,000 quid to make it, that film.
Mm.
But it's paid for itself over and over. And, you know, I mean, it's somewhat of a cult movie. I mean, I recommend everybody watches it because it does open your eyes to the wonder of maths and to the infinite possibilities hidden within mathematics.
You know, something else that I thought was very interesting, and I forget where, somewhere in my research for this interview, it came from something you said or you've been involved with, that the brain, I'm reading this from my notes, it actually fills in a lot of details of what we see because the eyes are not capable of seeing everything, taking in everything in the detail that it's there. So we're constantly filling in from our memories. Or like, you know, I look at this wall here and I know certain things are there. It seems I'm constantly filling in information I already have.
Yeah.
And that's quite limiting, isn't it? Because we're not necessarily seeing what we think we see.
No, we're not. I mean, certainly the eyes are not able to detect the fine detail that we see in our brain.
Yes.
And I mean, I would say that that's where the mind comes in and fills in the detail. I don't think it's necessarily the brain itself that's doing the work. It might be, because I don't know. I'm not a neurologist, but even they don't really know how the damn thing works, the brain even. But what these people should not do is deny the wonder of the mind. And you know, it pains me to hear some of these really bright scientists saying there is no mystery. Consciousness is, though they can't explain it, is not mysterious. It arose out of the mud.
Yeah.
It just, you know, a bit of lightning and you get a simple cell creature and that develops, you get all these varieties of life. And out of that springs consciousness, springs a perception of mathematics, a way of describing the world. I don't buy it. I really don't buy it.
So, Nigel, we have a couple of minutes left.
Oh, really? Is that all?
And you're still meditating with the mantra meditation you were given over 40 years ago. So how does meditation impact you these days?
I think meditation helps me just to focus, to relax. I mean, I can't claim to have experienced enormously high states of awareness, and I can't claim that the sound current has taken me back to the source. But meditation is a wonderful thing, and I really recommend it.
Did you ever have glimpses of what you had under LSD through the meditation or since then?
Yeah, I mean, I did, but I mean, we're not talking about the beautiful patterns, like you see in the Mandelbrot set. We're not talking about the sound and light.
But when you, Nigel...
The stillness.
Yeah.
The stillness.
Yes.
Be still and know that I am God.
Yes. Be still and know that I am God. I think that's a good place to finish, actually.
So do I.
I really appreciate you coming in. It's been a bit of a stretch from my mind taking on this thing of mathematics and fractals, which I knew very little about fractals before. But you know, I think we've got it a bit clearer, probably in layman's terms. And I would like to recommend anyone that's been fascinated by this interview, that's been triggered in you, really try and look at. They come together, the three films. They're Colours of Infinity, Clouds Are Not Spheres, Is God a Number? The music is by David Gilmour from Pink Floyd. As Nigel was saying, it's great music. And the patterns, the Mandelbrot set patterns are just fascinating. It goes in and in and in, really on an infinite basis, and you see the same patterns coming up after a time. It really is, it's mind-blowing stuff. So thank you, Nigel. Thank you everyone for watching Conscious TV. I'm also going to mention his new book again, The Colours of Infinity, and I hope we see you again soon. Goodbye.